Welcome to the Faith Secure podcast, where we are watchful, prayerful, and prepared. I'm Dr. Michael Brown, founder of Faith Secure and president of MDB Consulting Agency. Each episode, we sit down with experienced security professionals, law enforcement leaders, emergency management personnel, and security practitioners to have real-world conversations about real-world threats that are facing churches and faith-based organizations today. The title of this week's episode is Physical Security Done Right: What Churches Get Wrong About Protection. This conversation is going to be about clarity, structure, and the foundations of physical security. Today's guests bring more than 35 years of experience in physical security, threat assessment, and security design. As president and CEO of Business Protection Specialists Incorporated, he has guided nearly 5,000 threat assessment, risk analysis, security design, and related projects alongside his world-class team of security professionals with 150 plus years of combined experience. Mr. Frank Pichota has his master's degree in public administration, his bachelor's degree in criminal justice. He's achieved his Certified Protection Professional, or CPP, certification in 1994. And he was also the 8th person in the United States to attain the Certified Security Consultant designation through the International Association of Professional Security Consultants, where he also was a 2-term president, a 4-term board of directors member, and a meritorious life member. Mr. Pichota uses his company as a ministry to support faith-based organizations to enhance their security programs against a wide array of threats and risks. I am delighted to welcome Mr. Pichota to the Faith Secure podcast. Thank you for joining us today, sir.
Thank you, sir.
All right. All right. Good deal. Are you ready to go?
Let's go.
Okay. Let's start right here. Let's talk about what physical security actually means so we can remove the confusion.
Sure. I think if we were to differentiate safety from security, I would suggest that safety incidents result from accidents, and security events at churches result from incidents that have malicious intent. So we're really looking at the human hazard, whether that's a criminal, activist, terrorist. There's a human element to that, and there's malicious intent.
Okay. So how would you define physical security in a church environment specifically?
Well, it needs to be a program that's there to protect attendees, staff, volunteers, children, assets, and allow all of that to occur without in peace, without disruption. Where prevention of an incident would be your first goal. And then where incidents can't be prevented always, then having an effective response plan to contain the consequences of that event.
Absolutely. Where does design fit into prevention?
Well, most churches today are already designed. So this is really a lot like doing work in the K through 12 sector, where you've got buildings that are 40 years old and were likely built before we have the threats that we face today.
True.
So you're always at a massive disadvantage in a legacy building. But I would say that if there are renovations or new facilities going up and security doesn't have a seat at that table, that would be a significant missed opportunity.
Okay, that makes sense. So what would you say is the difference between visible security and effective security?
Okay. I think visible security would obviously be things that people can see, and they may have a deterrent effect or make people feel safer. But the reality is effective security would involve implementing mitigation strategies that align to a church's risk, and they may or may not be visible, but they correlate to either the reduction of the likelihood of an event occurring, or they help more rapid response. So visible doesn't equal effective, and effective doesn't equal visible necessarily.
They are definitely not synonymous. I get it. Okay. People who are even knowledgeable about what physical security means, they sometimes put too much emphasis on equipment. How often do you see churches overinvest in equipment or apparatus, but underinvest in assessment?
Well, I think assessments, obviously, while critical, are challenging for churches even that have security practitioners or safety teams in effect. I think a lot of churches really struggle with the implementation of technology because it's costly and the resources aren't necessarily there.
Mhm.
So if a church is fortunate enough to be blessed with the resources, they need to be very diligent in how they acquire that technology and try and get kind of an independent opinion about that rather than rushing off to a vendor who may have a conflict of interest in that particular transaction. What I do see a little bit of, which is a bit disturbing, is a lot of churches are just kind of rushing to try and quickly stand up a safety team and arm people and put them into a challenging situation that really creates problems with training, liability, and significant insurance implications. These things are not to be done quickly or lightly. They have to be done very deliberately.
That's true. That's true. I've run into that problem consulting churches myself. Okay, why does a formal threat assessment change everything?
Yeah, I guess the terms are interesting. Threat or risk assessment. We typically use the term risk assessment, and I think it's vital. It provides a roadmap of things to consider. It allows things to be put in order, things that can be done easily, inexpensively, and have a high impact on risk mitigation can be done quickly and early. Challenges, getting that done right and having it be affordable and quick. So I think as an industry of security professionals, to the extent we can find ways to simplify and accelerate the process of getting to risks identified, because it is vital for leadership of a church to understand what their risk profile is, and that's going to be different whether you're small and rural or a mega church in a urban area. All those factors have to be taken into account.
And you put that perfectly, Mr. Pichota, because what I've run across, and I tell people, security isn't something you buy; it's something you design that's unique to your situation. So there is no one size fits all. So let's pivot a different direction. Let's discuss threat assessment and risk analysis in the church context. You've guided nearly 5,000, which is an incredible number, 5,000 threat assessment and risk analysis projects. What stands out when you evaluate a church facility?
Well, I don't think the approach should be any different, whether it's a church or a manufacturing plant or a critical infrastructure facility. You have to follow the discipline of risk analysis, and really that's about facility characterization is one of those risk analysis elements, and I think that is very important for churches because there's such an array of different facilities, and understanding the size, the nature, the exposure points, just the fundamental characteristics of a location helps the analyst to really tailor the vulnerability analysis portion of the process, knowing that, okay, if we have a large kids ministry, we have to have a high focus on that particular area, or if we hold large community groups, that creates some additional things.
True.
So that really becomes important, because at the end of the day, the whole point of it is to do your gap analysis once you understand the threats, the facility characterization, vulnerability, and then also being able to know what good looks like as far as a protection posture, and then being able to highlight those gaps and put the implementation plan in order so that it's manageable and it can be done over time.
Perfect. What are the most, I would say, common physical vulnerabilities that you see? when it comes to houses of worship?
It's access control, hands down. We have to have access control. It's a fundamental element of all physical security. We should have a lockdown capability, and that typically, if we can electrify that, that's obviously the best and quickest way to get that done. We know that locked doors for sure save lives in the Catholic church shooting in Minnesota. The police chief came out and let everybody know about that. So locked doors is critical. Key control is abysmal in churches. We hand them out like candy. If a church is using electronic access control, again, the credentials get handed out very easily with a low threshold, and there's not sufficient effort and energy to recoup those when access rights are no longer needed, or to use some of the tools in the software like auto expiring credentials and things like that. So no question, access control is an opportunity for every location.
Yes. And that's funny you mentioned key control. That's one of the main things I focus on when I'm doing assessments of churches, because not only is the assignment of keys, what I found out is the storage of the keys is not secure. It's usually in the desk drawer at the secretary's office. But yeah. All right, let's keep moving. How does complacency show up in building design?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. I don't know if I might look at that just a different way, and that would be at what point of a design is security considered, or if it is at all. As we mentioned, if you have a project today where you're doing any kind of build or a renovation and security isn't there, that's almost negligent at this point. But you have to give grace to the facilities that were built 40 years ago, and then determine how do you mitigate that. And I think we'll get to some of that here shortly.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's you have to have security there, and typically there's going to be an architect involved in a project like that, and any security design consultant worth their salt needs to understand the flow of the American Institute of Architects and how you go through programming and schematic design, detailed design, get the construction documents put together, how to coordinate with other trades, door hardware and glazing and things like that, and make sure that risk is considered and properly balanced out with everything else.
Excellent. So let me ask you another flow question. How does traffic flow, entry control, and line of sight impact risk?
So less is better, obviously, with access control. So if we have the luxury of channeling people to a controlled number of entry points for entry, that's great. I love to see churches lock the doors after the service starts, and maybe position an usher or a volunteer there to allow people that may be operating on a different time zone and show up late. And then as far as line of sight goes, I think that's one of the most critical things when you look at a lot of the recent church shooting events. It has involved people walking up to the building with a long gun. So if you don't have somebody positioned outside to monitor approaching people and things of that sort, so from your line of sight perspective, I think you're missing an important element statistically that's evident in the incidents. Positioning people inside the sanctuary is something that has benefit, but if that's done to sacrifice the outside presence, I think that's a mistake.
I agree. Let me ask, what's one overlooked vulnerability that you find consistently?
Lack of planning, whether that's your prevention plan, and I really consider that kind of a physical security plan. That would be your prevention plan, and then on the other side of the coin, you have your emergency response plan. And typically with an emergency response plan, that's going to be an all hazards type of a plan, where security is going to deal more with the criminal acts and the terrorism type events. So your all hazards emergency response plan might consider risks that are maybe identified in a FEMA risk profile, or or other things that could have a substantial impact on your continuity of operations. But yeah, I think just having the plans and the practice and the drills and that sort of thing is very, very common. It's hard to get folks organized. I mean, church environments are busy. There's always ministries and getting organized for the main mission of it. And these
Right.
support functions sometimes get set to the side.
That's true. That's true. It's a lot of moving pieces when it comes to churches. All right. Should every church conduct a formal risk assessment? I know the answer to this before the viewers. And how often would you recommend?
Yeah, how often is, I mean, let's just state the obvious. Of course, they should have. I mean, if you don't go to the doctor and get an annual checkup, I think you're rolling the dice, especially at my age. But basically, how frequent is kind of a tricky question. I mean, I think that there's some models in the industry that would suggest a 5-year recurrence in some spaces, but I think it all depends on events. Change management is a critical element of a security program. So if there's major renovation changes or major operational changes, that may necessitate a limited look back. And then also, if a proper assessment is done in the first place, you're going to be looking at having an implementation plan and kind of a to-do list of things that need to be corrected. Mm-hmm. And if you've not made a tremendous amount of progress on that to-do list, reassessing, I'm not sure how much value that really would be, because you still have all this other work you need to be doing. So it really hinges on making sure leadership has a commitment to, if you're going to undergo the assessment, be prepared to dispose of those recommendations one way or the other. And risk acceptance is an okay answer. I mean, there's all sorts of ways you can transfer it with insurance. You can mitigate it with physical security. You can accept it. Those are all okay. And that becomes a leadership decision. Security people are paid advisors. They're not, or volunteer advisors, if you will. They're not paid to make decisions. That's leadership's job. And I don't think if your recommendations are not accepted, you shouldn't lose a lot of sleep over that. You've done your best to guide and lead leadership. They're paid to make decisions.
This is true. This is true. And as I said, when it comes to assessments and things of that nature, I tell churches, you can't fix what you haven't formally identified. I mean, you don't know where your problem lies. So yes, let's keep it moving. Now we're going to get to some nuts and bolts stuff, Mr. Pichota. All right. Sure. Let's talk about security design, layers, deterrence, and real world application. I want you to walk us through what a layered security environment in the church looks like.
Okay. I think this may come maybe a bit of an unconventional answer, but I'm going to lead this off with the fact that I'm a fan of church coalitions. Mm-hmm. I don't think that the physical security program starts at the property perimeter. It starts way beyond that. And by establishing relationships among local churches, you may find out about threats and incidents that are occurring just down the street and are imminent, potentially well before they get to your property. So the first thing is coalition. That then leads us to an intelligence and threat assessment program, which there's a layered approach to that in terms of micro local data gathering, and that means we have our ear to the ground with our members. So, for instance, I was working at my church 2 weeks ago, and a lady comes up to me and says, "Are you security?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, I'm being stalked," and she goes on to tell me about these incidents that are occurring, and shows me some text messages that she's been getting. So I consider that to be micro level intelligence right from the members. So you can have a problem originate internally. In fact, most of the things that I've seen have formulated from our own membership or employee base. So that could be a domestic issue that's occurring with an employee that may come into the property or whatever. So micro, local, regional, state, and national. That intelligence provides two things to the program. One, it may give us actionable information where we
Right.
can modify our security posture this Sunday or this Saturday, whatever day we're worshiping, and change our posture to a dynamic threat response type of a posture. So actionable intelligence. And then number two, when you start to get out in the concentric circle a little bit away from the church, regionally, state, and national, some of the incidents that we see happening in other locations can help inform what that risk profile may look like. And tying that back to the risk analysis, we typically would use a scenario-based approach. So when we see a scenario that's occurred at a different church, we have to reflect on that and decide, could that happen here? If so, where does that fit into the whole priority scheme? And what does good look like to make sure that we don't have that happen at our location? So that would be sort of the outer ring, the intelligence part of it. Then obviously you can, start to look at your crime prevention through environmental design, controls on the property, and start layering in like the onion skin. So we start at the property perimeter, the building perimeter, staff only areas that should be segregated, and then restricted areas, whether that be IT spaces or staff only spaces. You begin to layer it out from a physical standpoint once you get onto the property itself.
Okay. And we welcome unconventional answers here. That's how we get smarter. So thank you for sharing that, Mr. Pichota. All right. Now, here's the classic question when it comes to churches and security. Okay. How do you balance hospitality or being a welcoming environment with controlled access?
Yeah, you're not going to stop somebody from coming in. That would go against everything. We've certainly seen, instances where churches had their intelligence program working, and somebody they knew was going to be coming to create a problem showed up, and the safety team may approach that person and say, "You're welcome here today. We know who you are. We know what you're here for, and we're not going to tolerate any nonsense here today." But they're still welcome to come in, and you may have a personal safety plan for that individual when they come on. But we're not turning anybody away, and we're not likely going to be screening for weapons either. It's going to be open, and we have to deal with that as practitioners. But we can still apply the concept of least privilege, meaning after a certain time those doors get locked. And we don't just have everything wide open and not be mindful of that concept of least privilege. So it's a tricky balance, but it has to be done.
Has to be done. Okay. Now, you touched on this earlier, crime prevention through environmental design, or CPTED. But I want you, without getting too deep, I just want you to explain the role that environmental design plays in deterrence.
Yeah, it's let's see. I guess I would, to keep it light, I would consider it to be a tool in the toolbox, and it uses concepts such as territoriality. So clearly establishing your boundaries, creating an environment with natural surveillance so that legitimate uses are encouraged and illegitimate uses are discouraged. And maybe just by way of example, I've seen churches that have had, skateboarders that are, coming onto their property, and they're using the handrails on the staircases and damaging those in the process of all that. And they've implemented devices that they can bolt onto those handrails to make it not permissible.
Wow.
For the illegitimate use. So that would be a micro example of how CPTED could be employed to make it less desirable for the undesirable or non-authorized uses of the property. But it's certainly a tool in the toolbox that. I would say the other part of that is there's tools out there like the CISA Power of Hello. So our Department of Homeland Security, now CISA, puts out a lot of tools around house of worship security, and some of this really involves being able to recognize a threat. And we always say, hey, see something, say something. I mean, that's a really nice catchy phrase, but what does that actually mean?
Right.
And what that actually means is we have to have a profile for what is normal. So is it normal for a middle-aged male, let's say, without children, that hasn't dropped off, a kid at the kids ministry, to walk in with a large backpack? That's not normal. That's not typical, and it may not be an issue. But the point of that is it doesn't fit the normal profile of a person walking into our house of worship, and it does suggest, just at least being able to say, hey, wait a minute, this may not be normal. So it's really all about when we see something, what does that mean? It means recognizing positive abnormalities or negative abnormalities, meaning the person has something extra like a backpack, or they're missing something that they would normally have. And why would that be? It just has to raise our antenna so that we take a closer look and keep an eye on things.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So what mistakes would you say that churches make at entry points?
Well, we've covered most of this. Leaving them unlocked, poor key control, poor access control, system administration. I would also add to that really kind of a lack of maintenance. And what I mean by that is any kind of what I would consider to be a security critical opening should be self-closing without any kind of human involvement. And lots of times these doors bind, and there's dirt and rugs and things and age that happens, and these doors don't secure. So even in the best intention, I've got an electrified lock that I paid $3,000 for on this door. If it doesn't mechanically secure, it's not secure, and
Right.
That's a problem. So I think from an entry point standpoint, it's really making sure that it's mechanically sound, and we have the ability to know who's coming through, and that's an authorized person.
And Mr. Picciotto, I would just add to that. That's why I am a big proponent of patrols at churches, to just make sure the exterior doors are not propped open, things of that nature, and that they remain secured. I'm a big proponent of patrols to address some of those issues. Now let's pivot. I got a practical application question for you. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. I'm giving an example of a church of 800 to 15 members wanted to improve their physical security in the next 90 days. Where would you start?
Well, of course, I think you need to do your diagnostic work up front. These are table stakes. So conduct your assessment, start a safety team, build your coalition with local churches, get your intel and information network stood up, and begin to work down some of your high impact, low cost mitigations. And that should get you well on your way. Those are just fundamental things to at least get your roadmap out and know where you're going. Otherwise, any road will do.
Yeah, that's true. And some people, when you say physical security to them, they see walk through metal detectors and all that. And I'll tell people at churches that I speak with, some of the best physical security solutions are subtle, but they're intentional. So, and part of an overall plan. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, in this segment, now we're going to change it up a little bit. I'm going to give you a scenario, Mr. Picciotto. I'm going to see if you're ready. Okay. All right, I got a mid-sized church that operates multiple unlocked entry points during service for convenience. Cameras are installed, but rarely monitored in real time. Leadership believes the church is quote unquote low risk because of its location and culture. So now the question I'll start you with is, what concerns you immediately hearing that scenario?
Well, I think we've emphasized the need for a secure environment. So locked doors for convenience. There's always a trade-off with security. So it's typically a cost, convenience, and security triangle. And you can have two of the three, but you're not going to get all three. So you're going to have to make some choices around that. I would suggest that an assumption of low risk Typically, when non-security professionals are drawing those conclusions, they are doing so with incomplete information.
Right.
And I would
Absolutely.
be very concerned about whether that opinion is founded in fact or perception. So really, a lot of times folks feel like if they operate in a rural setting that, hey, things are okay, or crime is low. We don't have crime, therefore we don't have risk. That is fatal
Yes.
flaw.
Yes, it is.
On the matter of video, I do see some churches that will post up a person to monitor video during the service, and I'm not opposed to that. But I will say this: no person is going to be effective sitting there watching live video for an extended period of time. When you're at the airport, you see TSA change those agents out every 10 or 15 minutes. They're not standing there looking at the X-ray
Right.
screening process for very long. So we have to be prepared to address that reality. Video is typically recorded for forensic purposes, but there is some there is some value in live monitoring. But I would also suggest that we should be leveraging modern technology now. So analytics that may detect loitering or detect people in areas where they're not supposed to be, or vehicles where they're not supposed to be. That's easy, and it turns that video camera, which is typically considered a passive recording only device, into an active detection device. So it's a huge benefit, by doing so. So I think, overall that particular scenario would be well served to have a more deliberate look at their risk profile and better align their day-to-day practices with that.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to give you an escalation question. If a security incident occurred, what would investigators tend to look at first?
I can't answer that. Honestly, I'm sorry about that, but that would be typically scenario dependent. And I think your vocation and experience maybe lends itself more to an investigator's perspective. So I would kind of turn that back and say, hey, help me understand what they would look at first, because that's helpful to me in my ministry.
Well, in this situation, if they do indeed have video surveillance, you obviously start there with, okay, what does the camera show? What type of memorialization of the event do we have? We would start there. And then, again, this is me in my investigator world. You start interviewing witnesses, and you start from there. So cameras, witnesses, that would be the first start. And then you would take your investigation based on what information you gathered from those two things. That would be my answer. So
Sure. And I think on the point of the video, there's one common thing, and I'd like to kind of get it on record here, is that people see a camera go up and they automatically think, oh, I'm going to have facial recognition, or I'm going to have license plate capture and all of this stuff. And those facets of a video surveillance system need to be carefully engineered into the process. So if you're trying to get facial recognition, the resolution of that camera has to be 40 pixels per foot on target. And if you don't have that, you're not going to get facial recognition. You need 60 or 75 pixels on target for a license plate. And there's a lot of cameras that are really kind of built fit for purpose for LPR capture, and those should be used. We shouldn't be playing around with that if you think you need it. And it can just be these common challenges like, hey, people are driving onto the property and they're using our dumpster inappropriately. You don't know what they're putting in there, hazardous materials, whatever the case may be. LPR is kind of an interesting, relatively inexpensive thing to add to your program, like $2,000 a camera, and you can have a LPR camera that'll detect a vehicle, maybe up to 80 miles an hour, which isn't typical, but they can do that now.
And that's funny you mentioned that. I had this one company that was having an issue with illegal dumping, and the cost that business was incurring, having to have those dumpsters emptied more times than they necessarily needed to. So the cost of a camera would have offset that. So yes, that's true. Okay,
and cost benefit, that's a beautiful example, because oftentimes security is just looked at as a cost center, and sometimes it can be a it can be cost savings.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. We're going to start with a takeaway question as we wind this down, Mr. Pichota. Okay. What are 3 physical changes churches can implement without major capital expense? And I know major is relative. So, yeah. But what would you suggest? Just 3 physical changes that churches can implement.
Post a person outside with radio communication. So that to me is so vital to get that, long gun walking up the street. We must ensure the kids ministry is secure once they're all checked in and accounted for. If there's a problem on a church campus, parents may need to shelter in place. And if they're not confident that their kids are secure in a, shelter in place or lockdown scenario, you're going to have people breaching your physical security, and that can be a significant challenge. So making sure the kids are secure. And then, locking doors. I mean, come on. These doors don't sit unlocked at night. So we can lock them, and we should lock them. And that doesn't cost anything.
Okay. That's good recommendations. Great. Okay. Now we're in the closing section now. And I have a reflection question for you. Okay. Now in your LinkedIn, I read your LinkedIn bio, and you described yourself as a peace of mind partner. Okay. Tell us, what does that mean in the church context?
Sure. I mean, I think we're constantly dealing with non-security professionals, and we have to find ways to simplify the complex. So I would say I'm going to help a church leader, and we should be helping church leaders answer 2 questions. The first is, are we doing the right things in our safety and security program? And what does that mean? That means that we have a clear vision of what our risk profile is, and we have mitigation strategies that align to that. So are we doing the right things? Question number 1. Question number 2 is for the things that we're making investments in from a physical security standpoint, should we expect to get good outcomes from those investments? And that means having somebody that's got some level of qualification look at that, who can understand what good looks like. And there's a lot of security theater things that are done that don't achieve a lot of results. Yes. And we have to get beyond that. And everybody has to have their eyes wide open, and we can't worry about our feelings getting hurt. But for the investments that we're making, should we expect to get good outcomes? So those are the fundamental questions that if we can help everybody get comfortable with, they're going to have peace with that, and they're going to have confidence with that they can focus on preaching the gospel and doing what they need to be doing as their primary mission.
Right. So now, what separates organizations that truly prioritize security from those that check a box?
Fundamentally, if you don't have leadership commitment, you're out of luck. It's not going to work. You have to have leadership commitment. You have to have evidence-based approaches to your safety and security. And then you have to be prepared to make slow and steady improvements. There's no silver bullet. There's no throwing a bunch of money at a one-time capital campaign and saying, okay, we've got it fixed, we're out. There's none of that. It just has to be slow and steady. Physical security is not a destination, it's a journey, much like our faith journeys.
That's true. And no, what advice would you give to a church security director that's trying to influence leadership?
Yeah, I mean, that happens. That happens a lot. And you may not turn that corner overnight. I would say don't be an alarmist. Be realistic about threats and vulnerabilities. Monitor incidents that are occurring and share those. Try and raise the level of awareness and make reasonable and practical recommendations for enhancing security that don't interfere with people's accessibility necessarily from a reasonable standpoint, or things that would otherwise compromise the mission. But again, we're not decision makers here. We're advisors. So if leadership isn't committed to it, it's going to be very tricky. So you can't run a shadow program. You have to have that visibility and commitment.
And so how should pastors think differently about physical security, having said that?
Well, I think you've got to keep your eye on the incidents. And I'm all for turning things over to God. But there's a point where you have to take some, measure of control of your environment. And I would argue that that pastor is probably not just crossing the street without looking both ways, right? So we have to, realize there has to be some means of determining where we sit and what our risks are. I mean, we owe that to the attendees, to the children, and we can't just turn a blind eye and think that mystically it's all going to get fixed.
Okay, that's well said. Now, one final takeaway. Was one mindset shift that could immediately strengthen physical security in churches?
We have to do something. We can't. We have to do. I mean, we realistically have to do something.
Right.
And even if we only pick, one thing a year, we have to move in a positive direction. We have to do something. And
Yes.
And what I mean by that, it's not just doing an assessment. Okay, we did our assessment, put the report in the drawer. That's not doing anything. That's spending money and not getting value. So we have to be prepared to make incremental improvements and have those be evidence-based and sensible. And believe me, I think that attendees appreciate it. And it also means not ignoring things like medical emergencies, right? I mean, we're talking physical security, but we're more likely to have somebody, collapse over or have an issue. And if that same safety team that's watching for a person walking up with a gun has first aid training and they can wheel that person to a private area while the EMT group is on the way, we're building goodwill among members, and we're really showing that to be a valued asset to the organization. So it's really about building goodwill, I think, and socializing that in a proper way. Not that we're just guards, gates, and guns. That's not what it's about. It's much more than that.
Absolutely. And Mr. Pichota, this is why I wanted to have you on the podcast, is to drive home the point that physical security or security in general isn't about fear. It's about thoughtful design, informed leadership, and layered responsibility. I want to drive that point home. So I want to thank you, Mr. Pichota, for being our guest on the episode today. You did an outstanding job. You dropped a lot of nuggets on us and breaking down what physical security actually is. So I wanted to thank you for being on the episode today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. God bless.
All right. Just hang out for a few more seconds and I'll talk to you after I complete this podcast here. I wanted to thank you, the viewers, as well, for joining us on this episode of the Faith Secure podcast. If today's conversation helped bring clarity to your role as a church leader, security or safety manager, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. You can connect with Faith Secure on all social media platforms. You can also reach out to us directly at mdbconsultingagency.com/Faith Secure. Until next time, stay watchful, prayerful, and prepared. God bless.